Samantha Harris has been working in the trade company for about 3 weeks and has never seen the director. Some say that Ethan Bennett didn't like to wear out his pants at the office and was famous for being able to do business from seemingly unsuitable places, such as a restaurant, a nightclub, or even a casino. That was because Mr. Bennett loved to live his life wild, which entailed a great number of acquaintances and playing poker or blackjack. Meanwhile, everyone knew that Mr. Bennett was as cunning as a fox and could play out some ingenious combinations. That's why, when Samantha Harris was called into the director's office, she immediately noticed her colleagues giving her sympathetic looks. "I wonder why he's asking for me," the woman thought as she took the stairs to the second floor. That was where the director's office was located. His office was insanely big and looked very expensive. Having knocked gently on the door, Samantha pulled the doorknob towards her and stepped inside. "You asked for me, Mr. Bennett?" the woman asked politely. "Yes, Samantha. Come in and take a seat," the director answered and gestured to a chair. Then, clasping his hands together, Ethan Bennett coughed and got straight to business. "Having studied your personnel file, I was surprised to learn something very interesting. So, Samantha, I see no point in beating around the bush. The thing is that your file states that you know a few foreign languages, including German, French, and even Chinese. Tell me, is that true?" the director asked, looking Samantha straight in the eyes. "Yes, Mr. Bennett, I do know several languages. When I attended university, I didn't just get an economics degree, but also trained to be a translator. Only I couldn't find employment as one, so I got an intern position at your firm instead," Samantha explained with a timid smile. "I think that you've made the right choice when you got a job at our firm. So I want to offer you a job as an interpreter and my personal assistant. You will have less work and your salary will increase several times. What do you say? Do you want it?" Ethan asked, adjusting his tie. There are no words to explain how excited the naive young woman got over the director's offer. At that time, Samantha felt that she'd hit the jackpot for the first time in years. That is why, having accepted the director's proposal, Samantha's mind immediately went into planning mode, thinking of the bright future ahead of her. "Well, that's good. So be ready by 7 tonight, and please dress well. The business meeting with the partners will take place at an expensive restaurant, and I'm going to need your help as an interpreter," the director answered, hiding his satisfied smile. "Okay, Mr. Bennett, don't worry, I won't let you down," Samantha hastened to assure her boss. Unfortunately, when thinking about the upcoming evening, the young woman had no clue what plans the director had planned for her future and her career. Meanwhile, Ethan Bennett rubbed his hands and ordered his driver to get the car ready. Spencer Hughes had been working at the company for about a year and had proven to be a responsible employee. However, few people knew that he got his job as the driver thanks to his sister's connections. She was the best friend with the director's wife. Diana Bennett and Goldie Hughes had been friends since high school and were in the habit of sharing every details of their lives with each other. That's why Spencer's sister was well aware of his director's doings and knew that his boss often deceived his father-in-law, making shady deals behind his back. However, Goldie never wanted to upset Diana, so she always kept such unpleasant information about her dishonest husband to herself. But Diana Bennett wasn't a naive young woman and had long suspected that her husband was doing some borderline illegal business. However, Ethan Bennett always had a logical explanation to calm his wife down and pull the wool over her eyes. Nevertheless, when her husband called and said that he'd be staying late at work, Diana felt her heart skip a beat. He's probably going to play poker again and will leave a fortune at the casino. Where does he even get so much money for all that gambling? The woman thought. The poor woman could still remember well the times when peace and love ruled in their family. Diana and Ethan met 10 years ago, when they were both in their late 30s. The handsome businessman immediately turned the head of the naive young woman who had just gone through a bad divorce. However, it wasn't Ethan's looks that helped him win over his future wife, but rather his elaborate courtship and expensive gifts. Unfortunately, it was only now that Diana realized that she'd been living in the lies all those years, and that it was her cunning businessman husband who deceived her to get her father's firm as a wedding gift. "Why have you been putting up with him all these years, honey? After all, given your looks, you could easily find a decent man and live a happy life with him," asked Goldie, who really didn't like Ethan's antics. But Diana only lowered her head in embarrassment and guilt and shrugged her shoulders in response. Most probably, the poor woman simply didn't want to break up their family and deprive her 7-year-old son of his father. Thus, Diana preferred not to pay too much attention to all the signs pointing at her husband's gambling problem. Innocent until proven guilty, and getting divorced on suspicion would simply be foolish. Diana justified herself, trying to drive away the disturbing thoughts. Meanwhile, Ethan Bennett was already sitting at the table, waiting for Samantha to show up. Of course, there was no business dinner at all, as it was simply invented by the cunning businessman, who decided to use the naive girl and set her up. There were candles, champagne on ice, and all kinds of appetizers, and it was all intended to distract Samantha. Thus, having seen the table, Samantha looked inquiringly at her boss. The woman spent the entire day putting together an outfit for a business meeting, and now felt rather uncomfortable under the director's appraising look. "I'm sorry, Samantha. I was going to call you to tell you that the business partner canceled the meeting at the last moment. But then I thought that it would be a crime to let so much good food go to waste. What do you think?" Ethan asked, looking his employee directly in the eyes. "Sir, I think I'd better go home," Samantha answered, stammering at every word. The woman suddenly realized that whatever her boss was going to suggest would most likely fall outside the lines of law. Unfortunately, Ethan Bennett wasn't going to give up easily. He had his eyes set on Samantha for a while and was simply waiting for an opportune moment to use her for his illegal activities. Samantha started getting ready to go home, and Ethan called his personal driver to take the woman wherever she needed to go. "Miss Harris, let me give you a ride home. Trust me, Spencer will quickly take us there and you'll be back in your living room before you know it," the businessman offered in a calm voice. Samantha looked with uncertainty first at Spencer and then at her boss. Having eventually decided that Mr. Bennett wouldn't discuss anything illegal in front of his driver, Samantha got into the passenger seat of the chief's expensive Ford. But to the young woman's great disappointment, Spencer didn't even blink an eye as he drove in the opposite direction from where her home was. And when the car stopped near some wasteland, Samantha understood that she once again fell for her boss's tricks. "Spencer, be a dear and step outside for a smoke," ordered Ethan Bennett. After that, Ethan bluntly laid out the terms of the deal, which would bring huge damage to the company and enrich its director. To make it happen, Ethan Bennett gave the woman a bunch of documents. She was supposed to come up with some plausible pretext and get the company owner, who was also Ethan's father-in-law, to sign them. But it wasn't for nothing that Samantha spent so many years studying economics at the university to accept the terms of such a scam. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett, but I don't want any part in this," said the woman and resolutely got out of the car. Needless to say, her response sent Ethan Bennett into a state of uncontrollable rage. "You're fired, Samantha. You can forget the way to my office," the businessman shouted and threw Samantha's purse out onto the road. Then Spencer started the car and the Ford roared its engine and rushed towards the city. Meanwhile, Samantha wandered off and tried to hitch a ride home, barely managing to hold back her tears. The woman had no doubt that by rejecting her boss's offer, she had destroyed her career, and now she had to figure out what to do next. Of course, she couldn't have even imagined that at that very moment, Spencer had come home and was telling his sister about all that had happened. Sure, the driver wasn't going to tell about his boss's failures, and it was only Goldie Hughes's ingenuity that prompted him to do it. Spencer's story shocked Goldie so much that she decided to immediately share the news with Diana, who still refused to believe in her husband's illegal plans. To do this, Goldie invited her friend for tea and bluntly told her everything her husband had planned. "How could it be? Betraying my father for some poker game?" Diana whispered in shock. "I think that after everything Ethan has done, you should seriously consider getting a divorce," Goldie Hughes added cautiously. But Diana was no longer listening to her friend because a desperate plan had already hatched in her head. However, to successfully implement it, the woman would need the help of Spencer and her husband's humiliating ex-employee. But before taking such an important step, Diana wanted to look Ethan in the eyes and ask him about everything that happened. Of course, the businessman initially pretended to be very surprised and denied everything. claiming that she had no real evidence. However, when he heard his wife tell every single detail of his treacherous plan, he realized that there'd been a leak of information. I knew that I couldn't trust that spineless Spencer. I'm sure he babbled everything to his gossip sister. Whatever, I'll fire him tomorrow, and without severance pay, Ethan added, clenching his fists. Unfortunately, Diana knew her husband all too well to doubt that he'd go through on his promise. So she called Spencer the next morning and asked him to find Samantha and arrange a meeting with her. However, even though the former driver didn't mind getting involved in this scheme, the former employee wasn't all that excited about it. But when Samantha found out what exactly Diana was planning on doing, she felt even more reluctant to take part in it. Samantha's reaction was caused by the fact that Ethan Bennett's wife actually asked her to report her ex-boss's illegal plans to the police. Moreover, Diana guaranteed her personal safety and solid cash award for her courage and participation. Do you really think we'd have a chance? After all, Mr. Bennett has extensive connections in court and the city administration. Samantha asked, uncertainly. Oh yes, we'll definitely win. The thing is, if we get divorced through the fault of my husband, because he committed something illegal, I'll get half of all his financial assets. However, since he spent all his money on gambling, I'll get the company, which my dad once gave him. Those are the conditions of our prenup. But for my plan to work, I need your testimony and Spencer's attestation. Diana replied in a tone that wasn't open to objections. Only then did Samantha realize the scope of the plan. Ethan probably couldn't even have suspected that his faithful wife could have ever decided to make such drastic measures. However, when the police officers appeared on the businessman's doorstep, he immediately knew what had happened. Ethan's eyes welled up with tears, but that wasn't hardly caused by true repentance. True, thanks to Ethan's connections, he did manage to avoid doing any time in prison, but his financial situation and social status were ruined. After the scandal with the scam he was planning, almost all the business partners turned away from Ethan and broke all contracts with him. On top of that, thanks to the prenup they signed, Diana got half of Ethan's assets after the divorce, as well as the controlling share of the company. Tired of the endless scheming and all the lies of her husband, Diana took her 7-year-old son, Kevin, and went to sunny California. But before that, the woman fulfilled her promise and paid 5-figure amounts to Samantha and Spencer, who suffered from her husband's indecent behavior, giving them the opportunity to start a new life. Ethan himself, although did manage to avoid jail time, still ended up with virtually nothing. Thus, Ethan only had one option left: to start a new life in which there will be no financial fraud and abuse of power.